What's up, y'all? You're listening to the Extra Point College Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Carnes, joined as always by my co-host, Daniel Hammock. Daniel, unfortunately, the 2022 college football season is wrapped up with a bow on it. And, I mean, to the casual fan, I know this game wasn't very fun. But to you and I, for a couple of reasons, Daniel. One, it's no secret, we are both Georgia fans. Two, we love watching good teams play football. And we did get both of those things on Monday night in the national championship. I mean, before we dive in, how are you feeling about Georgia 65, TCU 7?
Yeah, I mean, I do understand the pushback for some folks, or a lot of folks, that it was a boring national championship game. But yeah, I mean, exciting for us. Also seeing history be made, in multiple ways. Stetson Bennett, his story, just kind of being able to be concluded. He has exhausted his eligibility. And so, just kind of seeing that kind of all come, to an end, and, the curtain calls and all those kinds of things. It was very cool, very fun night. Kind of felt more like a senior night than a national championship in many ways. But also, I mean, it was a huge stage, and it did feel like the brightest of lights. And one team was used to it, and one team was not. And I think that that's kind of the story here. Also, one team is extremely more talented than the other, and it was just not a great matchup. And kind of goes along with what your analysis was this week with formations and mismatches of the such, and that was really evident from the word go at the beginning of this game.
You know what else was evident, though, was you and I were not at the game. You and I were not at field level for this game, but I've read about and talked to some people who were on the field, and it was just that it was two different teams. It was two different sizes of athlete. It was get off the bus and this might be bad. Even beyond, run fits and stuff with the 12 personnel versus the 3-3-5, like apparently a Georgia coach said on the field before the game that big people push around small people when they were asked how they felt about the game pregame. And if you just look at the size of Georgia's offensive and defensive line, and then look at the size of TCU's offensive and defensive line, I could have told you first play when Jalen Carter pushed a guard back 6 yards that it was going to be a long night for TCU. Let's talk about the winners, Daniel. Our friend Josh Pate does padlock stats. I just want to read a few because there's the whole box score is a padlock stat in this game.
Yeah.
I mean, this is
to miss one here.
This is the biggest blowout victory in any bowl game in the history of our sport. And it happened in the national championship in the playoff era. This is incredible. I mean, points 65-7. How about this? Georgia touchdowns 9, TCU points 7. Total yards 589-188. Passing yards 335-152. Rushing yards 254-36. I mean, this was a splattering in every sense of the word. Georgia came out with an incredible game plan. I thought Todd Monken called the best game of his tenure at Georgia. I thought Stetson Bennett played the best game of his career at Georgia. Georgia's defensive game plan was, we are bigger and better than you, and they did what they couldn't do against Ohio State, which was get pressure without sending anybody. They were dropping 8 into coverage every play. They held Quentin Johnson to 1 catch and 3 yards. Georgia's secondary had an incredible bounce-back game. It's amazing when you don't have 3 first-round wide receivers running around against you. Maybe they're not so bad after all. Maybe Ohio State's a unique team in that way that can pick on you there. This was one of, if not the most complete game I've ever seen from a team in college football, and it happened on the biggest stage. And Georgia goes back to back. It was incredible watching. Again, I appreciate watching greatness. I know it was a blowout, and I watched a near, if not perfect, performance. The only blemish was they came out of halftime and had a 3-and-out. And other than that, the offense was not stopped. The defense gave up one big play. It was near perfection. It was incredible to watch.
Yeah, I think that you mentioned Josh Payton, his padlock stat. I think it was like 9 touchdowns for Georgia, 9 first downs for TCU. So that's remarkable. Georgia, of course, over 30 first downs. The biggest evidence for me this whole game. I mean, obviously, defense played extremely well. Huge bounce back because we're starting to have concerns based on the last 2 performances. It wasn't just Ohio State, LSU. Even though a lot of it was garbage time, LSU was moving the ball down the field, especially through the air, and had 500 yards of offense and a bunch of points, 30 points, which was the most on Georgia's defense up until the Peach Bowl, where Ohio State took it to another level and scored 41. Um, I will say though that the most glaring thing that pops out at this is the offensive line for Georgia. I mean, Stetson going unblemished, no sacks, and just the remarkable job they did in the run game and the pass game. 9 sacks on the season for this offensive line. It's the first time that that's ever happened in a 15-game season for an offensive line to have single-digit sacks. I think they beat that by a few sacks as well. So just a really incredible job by that offensive line in this day and age. They should have won the Jim Moore Award after seeing how
100%.
TCU kind of gave Michigan fits, who they won the Jim Moore Award, that offensive line. So these Georgia, I mean, the players are special, but I think it's like every area just really showed out in this game. And then, yeah, this really was just like Stetson's like swan song. Like he was able to just do everything he wanted on the field in complete command, making checks at the line of scrimmage. His runs, I mean, he was never touched. So four passing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns. I think he tied Joe Burrow with the most touchdowns in a championship game. And so that's just, just a phenomenal performance. And Kirby kind of coming out of character a little bit. He's very all business during a game, but calling the timeout to allow Stetson to run off for a curtain call was a shock. But I also, kind of felt like it might happen at that point, just because of how 52-7 was the score, and so they bring Stetson out, give him his due, and then he does the same thing to the defense, which was phenomenal. And it's kind of uncharacteristic because they're not seniors necessarily. They do have remaining eligibility, but you're talking about Keely Ringo and Jalen Carter, guys that are going to be first rounders. So very cool to see him do that for some of his guys that really made a difference these last 2 years. And so, like I said, that kind of gave it the feel of like a senior night or a homecoming of sorts, where they could kind of do a little more recognition. And Georgia, I mean, when the backups went in, I mean, like I said, it was 52-7. This game ends up being 65-7. So 2 additional touchdowns scored. And it wasn't until even later that TCU started pulling some of their starters. So, Georgia was the best team all year. They showed that they had their opportunity to lose in the Peach Bowl. And then the fact that they were able to have kind of a counterpunch to what happened and win that game, escape with a win. I had little doubt that this one was going to be close. Obviously, our score predictions were that it would be a blowout and it would be a cover. No one predicted this. So
Nobody. It's
yeah.
I thought I forget who said this. I was thinking about it too, because this game honestly didn't play out that different than the Georgia Tennessee game played out. The only difference is the dogs got called off in that game. And I'm like, is this what Georgia's capable of every week when they don't call off the dogs? Because I wondered, we got a group chat, it's off show. Of course it's off show. It's a group chat. I'm to say anyway.
It's okay.
But like I said that I would lay up to 14 easy, bet the house. 14 and a half. I'm like, only makes me nervous because when does Kirby call off the dogs? And then does TCU just like its championship experience lead the starters in, whatever. And I'm like, well, does he call off the dogs? It's a national championship and there's no next game. Like there's no
right.
Like the only thing you have to worry about are your NFL guys getting injured. Like
Right.
And they did pull the starters at the end of the third quarter and won 65-7. And you mentioned the Joe Moore Award. 100% they got that wrong. It's funny. Georgia's offensive linemen have been tweeting the Joe Moore Award, which is funny. Kirby Smart only tweets happy birthdays and go dogs on a Twitter account, but he actually retweeted the center, Cedric Van Pran, just said he had tagged the Joe Moore Award and said it still hurts. Xavier Truss, the guard, just quote tweeted ESPN's 58-point win history and then just tagged the Joe Moore Award with the yawning emoji. So it is funny that they know what they just did. Let me ask you this. So I don't want to go the episode without mentioning TCU, heck of a season.
Right.
This was a bad matchup. TCU is not a national championship contender. They're a playoff contender. That's what they did. They won a semifinal. This does not discredit their season. This is also not discredit them belonging in the college football playoff.
Right.
We mentioned it that this is a game that should have been played in the semi, but this is like, you can't look at the results of the playoff and then be like, oh, well, they didn't deserve to be here and here's why. No, you can't be hindsight. And also, no one was beating Georgia last night.
Right.
Nobody. And
they won a semifinal game, so there's no way you can say they don't deserve to be here. That's crazy.
And they beat a team that was undefeated. So, like, yeah, they 100% deserve to be there. They earned their way there by going 12-0 in the regular season. They lost their conference championship game, and then again, they beat the opponent in front of them in Michigan last week. So, credit to Sonny Dykes. That's an incredible turnaround to go from 5-7 to playing for a national championship. Those
Right.
Frog fans showed out in Los Angeles. They had about 50% of that stadium, which was really cool to see for a smaller private school. Hope those application numbers go up. Really, really impressed with the run they made and excited to see what the future holds for Sonny Dykes at TCU.
Especially with the new look Big 12 coming soon. Now, you got to think about, Texas and Oklahoma both moving to the SEC, the Big 12 bringing in, was it Cincinnati, UCF, I can't remember, Houston, and somebody else, BYU. So bringing all those teams in, who's going to be the big dog? We've talked about Baylor, how they were last year when they won the Big 12. Kansas State wins the Big 12 this year. And so you're the past 2 years, you really have been without Oklahoma and Texas anyways. It's like the Big 12 has already moved on, and then TCU's in the championship game. So I'm interested to see the dynamic of the Big 12, if it's still going to remain and feel like one of the major Power 5 conferences. Because this realignment does kind of, we'll get into that in the offseason, but I think it's big for TCU brand-wise to put themselves out there, and kind of get maybe some traction going that way. Sonny Dykes, great coach. So I think they're in good hands. Interested to see kind of, like I said, that dynamic in the Big 12 going forward.
Bill Conley of ESPN of SP Plus, which I am a big fan of. He posted an article today that it was ranking the best 2-year runs in college football history, and he ranked this Georgia run number 1. I just want to read one of the paragraphs because I thought it was really good. He said, winning back-to-back titles is almost impossible in college football. Inopportune injuries eventually strike. The pointy ball bounces funny in just the wrong time. Other teams with loads of blue chip talent find a rhythm and rise. Saban and Alabama came within a couple of games of a three-peat in 2013, but fell victim to one of the most shocking and enduring rivalry losses we've ever seen. College football has a way of bopping teams in the nose eventually. Georgia is going to enter 2023 as the top dog and won't have as many key players to replace as it did this time last year. We don't completely know what this is the start of in Athens. But it's definitely the start of something. And I want to turn the page to Georgia has gone back to back. It's never been done in the playoff era, and it's more difficult to do because you got to think prior to even the BCS, it was just if you got a lucky draw in your conference and then you drew a certain bowl game, again, based on conference affiliation, then everybody votes and you're the national champion. Nebraska in the 90s, right?
Right.
BCS, now we're like, hey, you got to go play the other best team. Like we're making you go play the number 2 team. Now you got to go play 2 games against a champion, like a high caliber championship level team. In a couple of years, it's going to be even harder because you're going to have to play 3, maybe 4 games against, we're saying championship caliber teams, right?
Right.
What Georgia just did is incredible, winning it in the playoff era. Going 29-1, going 15-0 this year. Daniel, they're 3-1 odds to win the championship next year. They're the favorites from Vegas. Caesars, I think, has them at plus 350 going into next season. Georgia's not going to lose as much as it lost last year off this team. What is the future of Georgia football?
It's bright. I could say that the climb is still going for Georgia. Say a three-peat would probably be premature, but also I don't think it's irrational. I don't think it's irresponsible to say it because Georgia has put themselves in that space. They have put themselves in the space prior to these 2 championships of being in the mix every year. These 2 championships essentially just validate what Kirby Smart has already built in Athens. You see that he's able to navigate the dangerous waters of complacency and everything like that. He's seen Nick Saban do it at Alabama with their back-to-back opportunity. And then he just seems proactive. He seems like he's had a plan for all of these things thus far. But by no means is anybody perfect. I do think that he's the premier coach in college football right now. For what it is, the trajectory, all of that, that may seem bold to some. It also may not seem bold because he's the 2-time reigning national champion coach. So I think that Georgia, like you mentioned with what they return, obviously the glaring loss is Stetson Bennett. So does the offense take a step back? And then your next question is, does that matter? And is this team built to sustain? And I think it may not matter relative to what we're talking about. I think it matters from a, roster standpoint. You got a new quarterback from a, offense, got a new guy calling plays from, a face of the team, all those kinds of things, team dynamic, all that changes a little bit. But, Kirby's still there. The staff, I would imagine, is going to stay mostly intact because nobody has necessarily been picked off the staff thus far in the coaching carousel. So we'll see if anything continues to change. But both coordinators seem that they're staying. I have, you and I both talked about it that behind Stetson, there's a lot of talent, on this roster. That's kind of why Stetson is such a big deal because he held off these guys, Carson Beck, Brock Vandergriff, even Gunnar Stockton. So it'll be interesting. There's going to be somebody emerge that we're not expecting, like they're talking about in 2013 with Auburn taking down Bama. What Bill Connolly is referencing. I don't foresee Georgia Tech taking down Georgia necessarily, as far as it being an arch rival like that. But who knows? The transfer portal it's going to be something where maybe the right coach gets with the right quarterback, maybe some magic, kind of like what Tennessee and Hendon Hooker had going on. That could very well happen at another school. The problem is, are they on Georgia's schedule, and can they beat the Dogs if Georgia's playing their A game? Which I think the short answer is, if Georgia plays their A game next year in every game, I think it's a three-peat, because I think that they're going to be entering that space.
Thought I unmuted it.
It was a
Surprise.
pause for dramatic effect.
Surprise. Georgia will be favored in every game next year. Shocker, right? Like they were favored in every game
This is my
this year.
surprise face.
Yeah. So Georgia also opens the season next year with UT Martin, Ball State, South Carolina, and UAB. Shout out to the SEC for getting that Oklahoma game off the schedule this year. So great schedule for Georgia.
Dud of September.
They then play at Auburn, Kentucky, at Vanderbilt, bye week, Florida and Jacksonville, Missouri, Ole Miss at home before, week 11 going to Neyland Stadium.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just telling you, Daniel, Georgia's walking into that game 10-0.
All right, Jacob, pick one loss on their regular season schedule.
Tennessee.
I would pick Auburn.
Auburn.
If I was picking, just for the sheer fact, I think that Auburn has, obviously with the coaching change, with bringing in Hugh Freeze, Hugh Freeze has beaten Kirby Smart. For what it's worth, he's beaten
2016.
Nick Saban. So putting those out there, but also Auburn's type of school that can turn things around relatively quickly. And Auburn winning that game does not necessarily mean that Auburn's knocking Georgia off the pedestal. It just means Auburn's winning one game. And I think that Auburn can win one game and get up for that one game. And it's at Jordan-Hare, phenomenal atmosphere. Georgia could also win 65-7, like they just did against Auburn, and I would also be
possible.
not surprised. So we'll just see. We'll see when that time comes. It's tough to pick a loss. I'll say that it is. We're basically forcing ourselves to pick a loss if we were to even entertain the idea, because Georgia really should beat everybody on that schedule by 2 touchdowns.
And they're going to be favored by 2 scores in every game, except for we'll see what Tennessee power ranks out to. I haven't seen some of the early ratings for next season. The transfer portal is going to, we'll have to see him closer to the season. But
yeah.
I mean, if you told me Georgia's going to be a 10-point favorite in Neyland next year, I wouldn't be shocked. But if it was 7.5, 6, I wouldn't be surprised by that either. So I will say that, again, unless something crazy happens, Georgia's going to be, the preseason lines are going to be double digits in 11 of 12 games. And that's why I think it's hard for them, or Alabama or Ohio State. It's hard to just look and be like, yes, they are losing a game and here's where it is preseason, because I don't think there's skill in that. Sure, if some injuries mount up and the right, the wind happens in the right night and it's in the air, and upsets happen in college football all the time. That's why we play the games. But it's hard to look preseason at Georgia coming off this back-to-back and just being yep, they're not doing it next year, because you and I were high on Georgia coming into this season, but we still didn't think they'd go back-to-back. You picked Alabama to win it all, picked Ohio State to win it all, and I just think I'm done doubting Kirby Smart. Apparently they were doubted. Apparently, I think here's the thing. The greatest coaching job Kirby Smart did was at the timeout in the Peach Bowl. It was somehow getting his players to believe people thought they were going to go 7-5 because
I started hearing that and I was like, okay, so that's crazy. They probably got was a sound clip from somebody talking about LSU. No, someone comparing 2019 and 2020 LSU, and he probably said, "See, that's what they think about you. They had 14 draft picks, we had 15. They think that we're going to do this." That's the only logical explanation I can come up with. Someone saying 7-5 for Georgia. I do understand them saying, well, y'all didn't think, we were number 3 to start the year, and people were high on this team or high on that team. Like, that's reasonable. I
Fine.
definitely believe
Yeah.
that. But yes, I agree. If Kirby's able to convince them that someone thought they were going to go 6-6 or 7-5, as Zion Logue said, as remarkable.
Oh man. Well, we're wrapping a bow on the college football season for 2022, but that does not mean the content stops. We're going to go ahead and turn the page to 2023. Daniel, you and I we have a few regular episodes that we do during the off season that we've done every off season. So we'll be doing we'll do a way too early top 25. Everyone's doing one of those this week. We'll do one. We'll post that on social media too. We'll do our final season XPR. We'll talk program rankings. So who is the best programs in college football going into the 2023 season? Who's back? Our favorite segment. So of
This will be
teams
fun,
like,
a fun
oh yeah,
update to that.
Nebraska, Miami, Tennessee, Michigan, Notre Dame. Who's back? All these schools that are like, when are we going to be back? Who's most back? It's one of my favorite episodes we do. Buying and selling stock in teams. Love that episode. So we're going to have a ton of off-season content, recruiting, of course. Spring practice is going to start. So just because we're not having games, which is sad, does not mean that the college football season is over. In fact, one is just beginning. But hey, if you've made it this far, and just in general, thanks for listening to our podcast. If you listen, I really appreciate you watching and listening to us. We do this for fun. This is not our full-time job, but we're just humbled and honored that if we had even one listener, we'd be grateful that you listened. So appreciate you. We love you. We love college football, and you can follow him on Twitter at Deep South Daniel. You can follow me on Twitter at Jacob Carnes with a K. That'll do it for this edition of The Extra Point.